All right, welcome to another edition of our subseasonal forecast contest. Today is May 26th, hard to believe. We're forecasting out to June 10th, 14th. As Zach has mentioned on our emails, we're now forecasting CDDs. We've been forecasting CDDs for a couple of weeks, and actually this week we have our first CDD verification. So we'll look at that in just a second. For today's call, we don't have any special guest speakers or hosts. But we have a couple segments that we'd like to bake into today's process. We have at least one new forecast contestant, and so we're going to spend a few minutes at the beginning here just talking a little bit more about the contest, about about the different tools, about the process, about the goals of the contest. So we'll spend 10 minutes on that or so, and then Michael Groon is also Michael Groon's been doing research as part of the forecast contest, looking at bias of, in particular, I think the ECMWF model, maybe a little bit of the CFS, and Michael is going to give us a walkthrough of his research and the takeaways thus far, and we'll have a bit of a discussion, and then we'll go into our normal forecast discussion. Before we dive in to our agenda here, does anyone else have any other things they'd like to add to today's call? Okay. Nick, first of all, yeah, I'd like to welcome you to the forecast contest discussion. I guess this is our weekly discussion. Thanks for joining us. And Nick, I mentioned to you, because I know we're going to hit you with a lot of stuff in a short amount of time. I'll be happy to talk to you a little bit offline too. Just, so if there's any kind of things you want to dig into, just make a note of it and we'll talk about it offline. How's that sound there?
Sounds good.
All
Thanks.
right, cool. Sure. And also for folks who have been part of the contest for a while now, in particular Zach and Michael and stuff, please feel free to just jump in here. I'm going to try to give an overview, but in particular from your perspective as students or recent students, definitely just jump in if I miss anything. I would say again the spirit of the contest here is what we're trying to do is a couple things. It's not so much about the performance metrics, although certainly we have those, and those are important. It's not just about whether you're number one or last. It's really about the process. So we're in terms of the research, we're trying to work on the process, methods, and things like that, and teach better methods, share knowledge about different research methods, about forecast strategies, and things like that. And ultimately test those forecast strategies. And that's where performance is important, verification is important, and learn from it, right? So we want to learn what strategies work well and what strategies don't work as well. We want to, and importantly, the contest is about sharing that knowledge, right? If for folks who don't want to share and learn from each other, this contest is not for you. So when you go to our forecast, this is where you make your forecast. This is where you submit your values, forecast mean and sigma. And again, I won't go through in great detail here. We could do a little bit of that offline, but just to give you an overview, this is where you would put in the mean and detail, or mean and sigma. Sigma is a representation of your spread of your forecast. That we think is also a really important concept, because there's still too often forecasts that are deterministic in nature. And I think, as we all know, once you get really beyond, the first few days of a forecast, beyond days 4 and 5, you really should try to capture the spread, right? If I told you, next Sunday there was no chance of rain, and you were planning a beach vacation or whatever, you would probably look at me like I'm crazy, right? You would want to know the risk and know that there's risk, there's uncertainty around that, right? And so we try to capture that and try to learn and apply that in the forecast contest. The formula statement is here. I'll give you an example of what that might look like. This is my formula statement from from today. When you hit load previous, it loads the most latest forecast. So this is mine from today. And so I show how I cook together my process. Everyone's going to have a different, formula statement, or could anyway. And it doesn't have to be objective. It could be subjective, but regardless of what it is, you just want to be able to defend it and have a strategy behind it. And then that gets into a little bit of the strategy statement, where that gives you a chance to explain where these numbers came from, right? For me, for example, my view of, in particular, as we get into the summer season, is that climate change is having a significant influence, based on my knowledge and experience. And I also, based on, again, experience and some of it with the contest and looking at performance metrics, I don't think the models, the numerical guidance, perform that well or perform well, historically. So I tend to put a lot of weight on either short-term normals, like the 10-year normal, or other sort of parameters that are accounting for climate shifts. And I don't put too much on the dynamic guidance. So that's a sort of a long story short. We'll talk more about those as we actually go through the contest. That's a lot of what we do during week to week, where we ask participants, other folks on the call, to kind of walk through their process. So you'll hear a lot more about that. And then any data and research that you use, we ask that you share that. So that's what you kind of do here, and you submit your forecast, and it's logged into our archive. I want to make another point here, and this does take a little bit of getting used to. We're forecasting, as it says up here, now that we're in the summer season, in nationally population-weighted cooling degree days. And the reason why we're cooling degree days is similar to temperature. It's just we measure it above or below. We measure degree days above or below a certain threshold. In the summer, it's above 65, cooling degree day, anything above 65. In the winter, it's below 65, and then we call it a heating degree day. And these are parameters that are very commonly used in the energy and commodities industry. And taking a step back, one of the other important goals of the contest, beyond better research practice and such, is creating opportunities for students and recent grads and things like that in the workforce, right? And so one of the complaints we've had for many, many years about when we've done things like this, like forecast contests, day one forecast contests and stuff, is, well, hey, how do I apply it to an energy company or a trading company? Might say, yeah, but I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to take a temperature forecast, and I don't know what that means. And because we always look at heating degree days, or we always look at cooling degree days. So what we're trying to do as part of this contest is actually require the students to learn more about the industry, right? And there's a learning curve, and it's not something overnight, and everyone has to go through it. But we think it's important, right? Because we think when you're, when you graduate at some point, or you're looking for an internship, and you're able to talk to some of these companies and interview, the fact that you're going to speak their language, so to speak, you're going to speak heating degree days and cooling degree days, is going to give you an advantage, right? It's going to help you. So that's why we try to practice and use these kinds of predictors, or predicans, or parameters here, and not just forecast temperature or something like that. And we spend time on a weekly basis kind of going through these things. And the other thing, and this is really important point, and I'm going to switch gears here, or switch to a different screen. We don't want you to try to figure out what a normal heating degree day is, right? That's not the point of this contest. The point of this contest is not for Nick to say, oh my God, how do I calculate a heating degree day? Or what's a 30-year normal heating degree day for this period? We're going to provide you with a lot of data. Zach helps me with this. We on a weekly basis, we're going to provide you with 30-year. In fact, here, I'll show you where it is in the contest. If you go to the current week, which is 5/26, some of these data points are human forecasts, some of these are models, and some of these are actually the normals, right? And this is going to be available for you when you make your forecast. So, for example, if you feel like the 30-year normal is absolutely the best forecast for this period, all you would do is forecast 36.2 and the standard deviation. That's it, right? That would be your strategy. That would be your number, right? So we provide you with a lot of different inputs. We provide you with the EC. We provide you with the CFS. We provide you with the normal 30-year. A number of these other inputs we're going to provide you with. What we're challenging you where the focus is saying, what do I do with all this? Like, how do I, how do I put it all together? How do I, what's the what's the formula, right? That's going to give me the best forecast, right? And that's where we want you to put a lot of your time and thinking. And in the short term, it could be very basic in terms of, hey, maybe it's a 30-year normal. As you learn and grow, as you look at things and look at other people's forecasts and learn from them, you say, hey, it might be a 50-50 blend between ECMWF, and the 30-year normal. And then over time, you may, and we encourage this, you may come up with a Python or MATLAB script that does some sort of bias correction on this data, and you come up with a more complicated, complex formula or algorithm, and that's great too. And a lot of benefit, I think, to the contest, and a lot of benefit to you in terms of for other folks being able to see your things. And I want to say too that we also have a lot of we try to encourage industry participants to get involved. I think in today's call, we're very fortunate that we have Dave D'Arcangelo, who's I think he jumped in. He's been in the industry for many, many years, like myself. And so that also creates an opportunity for you to ask questions, listen and learn, and just have a great engagement in terms of connecting students, industry, and academia and stuff like that. So I know it's already we're kind of 15 minutes deep. Let me take a deep breath there, and let me see if Nick, if first of all, if you have any questions, and then also I want to ask and see if Zach or anyone else wants to add anything to this discussion.
I don't think I have any questions just yet. Still kind of absorbing the process here, but I'll be sure to note anything and then bring it up.
Okay. All right, great. And Zach, do you think there are any key elements that I missed?
No, I just, Nick, for future reference, I don't know if you're on the, I'm guessing you've been getting the weekly emails.
Yep.
Yeah, so in those emails, there's links to this forecast note sheet that Dave and I provide. There's links to the website. There's any important information going on that week, who the special guests are, if we're doing anything special with that, with the forecast that week. So that, if you ever have any questions or you're looking for a place to start, that email is a good place to go. And then obviously following to the website, there's a pretty expansive set of materials on the website now that you can easily look to for help. And then you have my email, you have Dave's email, and any questions you can direct to either of us.
Actually, I think I'm only getting the invitation email for the Zoom call.
Okay. Well, we can, I'll take your email off that and we can add it to you can get the official forecast contest email every week. I'll be sure to add you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and that was the last thing I just wanted to mention. I definitely encourage you to take a look at, in particular under tools, there's a number of things. If you click on resources, there's a lot of links to different data sources here. And actually, one of the things I left out, we have our partner in this is Maxar. It's one of the leading commodities companies that provide weather data and model guidance. And they will provide you a login and password to their site so that you can have access to a lot more data and information. So just please remind me after this call, and we'll set you up with that. And then also I encourage you, although it takes a long time, but we record all these videos, and there are some helpful videos up here. Some of these are just standalone, like one-offs, where we talk about the performance metrics or weighting schemes and so on and so forth. And then we also we record which we're doing right now, our group discussions. So if you ever want to look back and kind of just peruse some of this stuff, that's available too. So, and last but not least, there's also for some of the weather data, you can click on the weather snapshot. It's not fully comprehensive or whatever, but there's a lot of stuff here. So you'll hear us during our calls talk teleconnections, MJO. A lot of that stuff is here. So a little bit of a one-stop shop. Okay. So again, I know Nick, don't worry. We'll talk more offline. And then I think just sitting on some of these weekly calls, I think will be super helpful. It'll help you absorb more of this information over time. All right. So with that, then I will turn it over to Michael. Michael, I assume, would you like to share your screen?
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea.
Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing here. And you should be able to share.
It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Yeah, I don't trust you. No, I'm just that's a new feature. Try it now.
All right. Okay. Can all see it? Okay.
Yes.
Should be okay. So the I'll just start. The purpose of this research project I'm doing is to try and find a reliable bias correction method for the euro that improves forecasting accuracy in terms of CDDs and HDDs. Going into the summary, so far during the period going from May 2019 to now May 2020, no one bias correction method has been able to consistently on a week-to-week basis outperform the euro model. However, there have been several inputs that have beaten the euro model overall in the skill metric I use. Those are for the CDD season, inputs 4 and 2 outperform the euro, with input 4 being the winner, beating the euro by a pretty good margin. And during the HDD season, input 4 again was the winner, again beating a euro by beating the euro by a similar margin that it did in the CDD season. So that was I thought that was pretty interesting to see that. Input 2 was not able to beat the euro during the HDD season. So nothing too surprising there. It's not a very complicated bias correction method, input 2. So that was expected. Input 9, which was one of our newer bias correction methods, was actually surprised me, beat the euro and almost beat the input 4. So have to look to see how that continues to perform. However, there was a caveat. There were some issues with the data during, I believe it was our Christmas/New Year's break. I didn't have access to the data that for that forecast method, so I had to kind of improvise some of the data. So not the best, but so I need more forecast to see if that ends up working out or not, or if it was just a fluke due to bad data. Kind of working out, blind squirrel type deal. So that's the basic summary. As for some other works in progress, I'm working on some graphs offline, trying to work out what graphs will look best, etc. Always looking for new forecast input methods. If anyone, I might as well mention, if anyone has any ideas they want to shoot to me, my email is in here. It's, I believe, mgarin59@gmail.com. If anyone wants to shoot me something or has an idea, I'd be more than willing to check it out. And I've got some other ideas here as well, but to keep it on the shorter end, I'll just kind of skim over those as some other bias correction ideas, and I can get into more detail with those if someone wants. Any questions? I know I'm sure someone has a question about what my skill metric is. I use MAPE, which is mean absolute percent error. I'll just show the formula for it real quick. So it's basically the error of the forecast. So for input 4, I'll just use as an example, unless someone doesn't want me to, in which case because you have to stop me, otherwise I'll keep talking. So for forecast 1, the error would have been the forecast here from the normal. This is input 4. So So the forecast from here minus the verification, divided by the verification, taking the absolute value of all that, and then multiplying by 100. So this is essentially a percentage. And since I'm here, these are all the error values for all the different inputs over the HDD season 2019 to 2020, and you can see here's input 4, and this is input 1 is the euro, so almost a 4.5%, 3.5%, or actually, yeah, 3.5% better performance from input 4 versus the input 1, which is the euro. So that's my quick spiel. Does anyone have any questions? I can go deeper into things, etc. Comments, complaints, concerns.
You said at the beginning, I think you said input 9 was a new metric that you were using.
Yeah, recently new. I came up with it. I think it was somewhere in the middle of the CDD season, so probably around August, September area. So it's relatively new compared to the others. It's not. I think it's. I want to say it's not new to you or Dave, but it might be new to other people.
What's the weighting? Like
The weighting is I use 60% of Dr. Decker's MJO analog forecast with 40% of the normal Euro forecast. And these, just since I'm over here, these are the 5 forecasts that I didn't have any. The MJO forecast just wasn't there, so I ended up using Dr. Roundy, who also uses the MJO. So I might just end up taking these out. Not that, which might actually, looking at some of these scores, might actually end up helping it a little bit. But so yeah, if anyone has any input on what I should do with that, I'm all ears on that one.
Any other, thank you, Michael. Any other questions for Michael here? Michael, I did have just one question. And I think what if I was asking you, right? So this is, we want to make sure this is super practical, right? So
Yeah.
if I'm Dave Darkangelo, I might be thinking right now, well, what if I only had the EC model and all your inputs? Let's just say that's what was at my disposal. What do you recommend I use for today's forecast? What should I use the EC? Should I use one of these inputs? At the end of the day, what does all this research tell you about what I should do today?
Based off of what the research shows, input 4 is what you should use. So that would be a blend of the 10-year and the euro. That's been the one that's performed the best over I guess the past year now. That would be my answer.
And is that what you're using in your formula?
I don't incorporate the models into my formula. If you're referring to the forecast contest, so
Yeah. And I know that's a
so
little bit of a different question I asked you. Because not to put you on the spot, right? The first question I asked you was if you only had the inputs that are in this, right? Obviously, there are other inputs that are not in this, which is why you might not use here. But I am curious, do you use this in your forecast process? And if you don't, why not?
I don't actually use this in my forecast process, mainly because I don't really use the models, at least not their HDD or CDD forecasts. In my actual formula, I use mostly teleconnections and the CPC in my forecasts. So I don't really use models, so there'd be no place really for this in my formula. Although if I ever change my formula, I probably incorporate or at least try to incorporate this just to see what happens.
You know, it might be interesting. Presumably, you do that because you think your formula, you know, with the teleconnections is better, right? I presume. So it could be if you haven't done, if you've done this, it'd be interesting to see the results. If you haven't done this, it'd be interesting then to compare your forecasts over, you know, whatever period, weeks, months, you know, as far back as you want, versus this formula, which is presumably not going to change, right? These values based on this formula, and to see how they compare. Because, right, then,
Yeah, I kind of have I sort
oh,
of
you
have
can,
an answer
okay.
for you on that. So, if I just check quickly, need to see, because I have Maxar on here, and I think, yeah. So Maxar, based on based on this, did slightly worse than I did. Of course, no offense to Maxar. And I have Maxar in here is their industry, so their input 6, and they uh, did slightly worse than the input 4. So I would wager that input 4 probably was, and this is kind of iffy, but it was either the same or it was slightly better. Input 4 was probably slightly better than me,
Okay.
which is making the case for me to switch over to using this.
Okay. All right. That's unless anyone else, does anyone else have any other questions before we move on?
Also, just throw in if anyone wants to have access to this, it is a Google Doc right now, so I can share that with anyone that wants to see it or look at it or whatever.
And Michael, I have a few other ideas and suggestions. Maybe we can talk a little bit offline. Just
Yeah,
send me an email, remind me. Okay. All right,
yeah.
great. Well, thank you for sharing this. And yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of continue to see how it does through the course of the summer here.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to share my screen again here, and we'll switch up now. We'll do a quick. I know it's already 11 Eastern, so we'll just do a quick attribution, and then we'll get into today's forecast. I think that makes sense. And I just also one other point. So I think as we talked about earlier, we now actually have some verification for the cooling season. So we did update the tabs up here. So now, if you just want to see cooling season, if anyone sees, you can click on these tabs here. If anyone sees a bug, please let me know because we just updated this the last couple of days, and it's possible that we missed something. But you should be able to just click on under summary, official cooling season, and sandbox. You should be able to click and see results just for this cooling season. And of course, we just have the one forecast so far. I haven't updated the 90 or 30 days because it's not really relevant at this point because it's we don't want to conflate HDD and CDD. At least I don't think we do. So until we get a little bit more data, it won't really make sense to have the 30 and 90 days. So right now, if you want to look at cooling season statistics, you can look at these two tabs here, or of course you can look at the weekly tab also, and that's the most recent verification was this forecast from May 5th, verifying just a couple days ago. And so let's take a look at the scores here. Looks like the verification came in. Again, this is CDDs. This is our first CDD verification of the season. 21.7 CDDs, national CDDs. Perspective, that I think it fell between the 30 and the 10-year. Yeah, so the 30-year is 20.5, and the 10-year is 24.9. So not from an extreme kind of perspective, it certainly wasn't too exciting. It just kind of fell within the goalpost of 30 and 10-year. In terms of best performers, leave it to our moving averages. I guess technically, I think they were, the 15-year moving average was the closest. In terms of human forecast, Philip, are you on the line? I don't know if Philip's on the line right now, but Philip performed the best here with a positive CRPS, a little bit above the 30-year. And then in terms of the bottom performance this time, it looks like the ECMWF and the CFS off to a rough start. The CDD season. We saw this, I think, was it last year too? I think it was. I guess we could check it here in a second, but very low CDD number and too low, obviously. So it was the worst performer, and not a good start off to the season. Let me take a look. Let's take a look at the Dynacash just so that we can look at the pattern. So again, we're going to look at I was cheating looking ahead earlier, but I'm going to pull up the 20th, 24th. And Nick, I know you're looking at this for the first time, but again, this is a Maxar tool. It's a really nice tool that they provide us so that you can pull up all kinds of neat maps and stuff. All right, so this was the verification for May 20th to May 24th. It's kind of interesting. Kind of in some respects, it kind of looks like a classic trough ridge, cool in the west, warm in the east. But you can't. This is an important small area, might be, but it's like the megalopolis they call it, right? DC to Boston. The DC to Boston area was kind of cool, and so you weren't getting any kind of CD production to speak of, in this area, or very limited anyway. And that's probably in part what ate into some of our CDDs. But certainly you got some CDDs from the south, Texas, and down to Florida and some of those areas. So that's how it looked at the surface. And let's just kick it up and look at the hemisphere view. And then I'm going to open it up and just see if anyone wants to comment on the pattern here, and just talk about any unusual kind of things. Actually, let's look at the global view. I think the global view is better. All right, is it me, or did I do something different? Does that look a little bit different than previous? Did they change something? I don't know. Looks a little different to me, but maybe they just changed the maps. Anyway, so this is our 500 millibar height anomaly pattern. So there's the trough ridge in the United States. Oh, I see what they have a mask. That's weird. Did I put on that mask? The oceans are masked out. They don't have the 500 millibars over the ocean. Oh, I did that accidentally. Let me click it. There we go. There we go. User error. That's me. Okay, so now you can see the entire globe in terms of the pattern here. Let me pull up one other thing before we open it up. I'm going to pull up Maxar's forecast, and also in this respect, we can look at the EC and the CFS. So what did we say? This is May 5th. So let's pull up May 5th. Excuse me. All right, so this was Maxar's 16 to 20 day report. Nope, I did the wrong thing. Change date. All right, that looks right. All right, so this is from May 5th. So this is their forecast for the period verifying we're looking at, May 20th, 24th. Here's the east. Well, yeah. So here's yeah, well, let's compare it side by side, and we can let everyone else judge. Let's go back to the US, and we'll do temperature. So there's the temperature with the cool in the west and warmth in the east. Yeah, I guess my first impression of looking at this from the models and such, and I mean even particularly the EC, obviously the models from a numbers perspective did not do well, the EC and in particular the CFS, and from a pattern perspective, right, clearly the EC did not capture the trough in the west, right? I mean, it just doesn't look that good. Is the bottom line to me. It just doesn't look like a capture. And the Maxar forecast, I guess it had some of the warmth in Texas and whatnot, but the interior west was obviously cool, and a lot of the northern tier of the country was pretty warm, right? So it didn't really capture the upper Midwest that well. So from a pattern perspective, it looks like this was a challenging forecast. Let me open it up. Folks have thoughts on this forecast?
I just want to point out the CFS, its only area of warmth appears to be the same corridor in the northeast that wound up being below average.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you could see a little bit of splotchy yellow around DC. Yeah, yeah. And obviously, that did not work out.
I think it's really interesting too that if you look at the Maxar map, the where they're putting their temperature gradient, the orientation of their large temperature gradient is flipped almost 90 degrees from what I don't think I've seen that before, where it's almost a horizontal temperature gradient across the northern US. But if you look at the verification, it's almost completely vertical. I don't know if that's
That's a good way to describe it. Yeah. It's like tilted yeah, exactly. Tilted 90 degrees, was it counterclockwise? Yeah.
that can certainly lead to a lot of misses.
It's funny. This is a forecast that, from a performance perspective, in terms of looking at the numbers, the numbers weren't. I mean, I guess there were some exceptions. Yeah. I mean, okay. I mean, I guess more forecasts than not did not perform well, right? I mean, most of us were below the Mendoza line, so to speak. We were below the 30-year. So I guess, I guess it was a challenging forecast from that perspective. Yeah. So I guess in that case, the numbers, I was going to say that the numbers maybe didn't reflect the poor performance of the pattern. But now that I kind of look at it, yeah, I guess the numbers overall, Philip was the only human forecast that performed better than the 30-year. So I guess the numbers do kind of reflect somewhat the pattern.
One other thing I'll mention, this is mainly for me, is in my forecast I mentioned I was expecting a negative or at least slightly negative NAO. And based on that map, the 500 millibar map, it did not look like that materialized too well.
Yeah.
So, more teleconnections troubles.
Yeah, and I was just reading through their report to see if there was anything, I don't know, provocative. Yeah, they mentioned, actually, they didn't mention the NAO, but they mentioned some of the others. I guess the last thing I'll say about this, and we can move on to the forecast, or maybe Dave Darkangelo wants to say something about this too, but, it's, they say sometimes devil's in the details. I mean, being able to forecast with this precision and to capture, the megalopolis and this cool slice at 16 to 20 days out, boy, that's, I think there's something to be said about capturing these synoptic level spatial patterns over a few thousand miles across, like this general trough ridge, that there's some, that the models can have some skill, and maybe human forecasters in maybe capturing this kind of pattern under certain circumstances. But to capture a kind of, maybe due to easterly flow or whatever, some of the storm activity we had, to capture this kind of precision is, or almost like a mesoscale, almost a mesosynoptic scale, is really challenging, I think, at that lead time.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just I heard my name and caught my attention, and I'm kind of half listening because I'm trying to send another email out here. But yeah, I agree with what you said, though, which is just broadly that if you can capture the trough west ridge east pattern, you're doing pretty well. And then obviously you can refine that. The only thing notable, and I don't know if this was mentioned, again, I've kind of been half in, half out of the conversation. The Atlantic water temperatures north of Cape Hatteras have cooled pretty sharply the last, I don't know, 6 or 7 weeks. Some of that is pattern related, right? It's been a cold pattern. And we've got some, we've had some fairly potent cold fronts, go off the northeast coast, and we've mixed down some cool water, or, translated to some cool water. Anytime we're going to get northeasterly, easterly flow, we're going to really struggle here for a bit in the Northeast until we can kind of reverse that trend. Yeah, there you go. That's fairly telling right there. Again, it's really more subsynoptic scale type phenomenon, and sometimes it's precip related. As we noted, when we get into these CDD situations, right now, particularly for like the lower Mid-Atlantic, Southeast. But water temps have played a really big role recently. Like all of us that are in the Northeast that have struggled to get a lot of sunshine, or are plagued by this onshore gunk most of the days. That's been a tough one, and particularly when the ridge axis extends so much farther north, towards Hudson Bay and northern Quebec. You're just inviting highs to come down over the top of that in a sense, and kind of hit you with a northeasterly flow. But you're right.
Hey, Dave, any thoughts? I know this may be a bit of a segue, but you were talking. I mean, there has been a lot of let's pull up the. It still looks like there's a pretty good fair amount of cold air in Canada, cold pool in Canada, and like you mentioned, the oceans and some of that. I mean, do you have any? Do you want to provide? Do you have any perspective in terms of what this might mean for as we get into June? I mean, could we be looking at another month where it's kind of at least not hot, but basis normal, kind of normalish? Or do you
that
think?
seems fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going with kind of a normalish look, particularly in the eastern third of the country. Feel like the opportunity for like getting and parking a ridge in the east is going to be difficult for the month of June. I don't know if we're really quite getting a summer preview yet. It feels like we're going to have some alteration of the pattern as we extend into more midsummer because of this, oncoming La Nina, and we'll see what the tropics try to do in the West Pac and the Atlantic at the same time. But at least for the next couple of 3 weeks, it does feel like, my view is it'll be tough to get hot in the big cities of the Northeast for more than, obviously they can get a day or two ahead of a front, but I really think it's going to be a struggle on a consistent basis to get hot. Now, other things will be happening nationally. Like you'll have this kind of, it looks like we're predisposed to somewhat of a mid-continent trough, and that's going to kind of, wash east or west, depending on other influences. But yeah, for the Northeast specifically, it feels like a June that is, for lack of visibility, really, beyond say day 10, I'm fairly content to, I don't know, call it something between the 10 and the 30-year normal.
Okay.
For that.
Okay. Thank you.
But that's, May is always a really challenging, month. Everyone's looking to think that like somehow we're getting some summer preview by what the maps look like the first or second week in June. And, and that's been true though, I think, for the last 5 late May, early Junes have been pretty hot, and it's been a reasonable extension into summer. But, if you look at like a long-term basis, the last, say, 30 years, there really isn't any correlation between what you're seeing now and, July, August patterns.
That's a good point. Okay. Thank you, Dave. So we've got, 10, 12 minutes left. So let's switch over and talk about today's forecast. And why don't we definitely do our 2-minute drill here, since we're in a 2-minute drill. And who would like to just give a preview? It looks like we're ranging from about 43 CDDs on the warm side, 28 the CFS on the cool side, and just benchmarks here. The 10-year normal is 41 or so, and the 30 years 36. So the 36 to 41 is kind of the normal range. And again, our high point is just a little bit above that, and our low point is actually quite a bit below that. So looks like a little bit of a I guess it's a range, but maybe a little bit of a skew to the cooler side because of the CFS. All right. Who would like to kick us off?
I can go first if no one else wants to.
Please.
All right, so my forecast was for 42.1 CDDs with a lower confidence spread of 9.5. This is mainly due to the teleconnections giving me some very poor signals. They're mostly the spreads are pretty wide. So I didn't really have much of a pattern to get out of that. So kind of just went with the midpoint of the spread just to kind of get something out of it. So wound up with a slightly negative to neutral NAO, AO, PNA, and EPO. So that actually, no, the EPO was positive. So I kind of went with a warmer east, cooler west type pattern, which the CPC doesn't necessarily agree with. They have a warmth in the west and warmth in the east, with actually straight down the middle is basically neutral. So I'm equally worried here, as this might be based on the nature of the CPC forecast being from June 6th to June 19th. There might be a pattern shift going on in there. So a really pretty low confidence forecast from me, but 42.1 was the number that I went with. Any questions, complaints, comments, concerns?
Okay, thank you. Zach, you want to give your forecast?
Yeah, sure. So my forecast for this period was for 41.7 CDDs with a normal spread of 7.8. I stuck with the formula that I used the last couple CDD, actually the whole entire cooling season so far. Haven't had enough verification to see if it's actually a reliable formula or not. But it's a 60% weighting on the 10-year normal, 40% weighting on the trend. So basically just apply those that weighting scheme to the numbers on the table, and out comes 41.7. But I did do some subjective analysis on the models themselves. There is a lot of warmth in both the CFS and the EC leading up to the period of interest, but in the 16 to 20 day period on the Maxar site, the CFS was showing a bit of cold creeping into both the northwest and the northeast. But then when I looked at the CBC, that was also showing quite a lot of warmth in some of these areas that would be accumulating CDDs. So my thoughts is that it's definitely a warm skew to this forecast, and you can see that in the value that I kept, or the value that I plugged in, and so I kept the spread normal, seeing that any sort of variation I think would be covered by a 7.8 CDD spread. The only risk I think is that there's a chance that the CFS might be accurate in getting some of that cold creeping into both the northeast and the northwest, but I'm not entirely sure how reliable the CFS is. I mean, we know based on last winter that it was not reliable at all. I don't know if that changes in the summertime, but we can certainly see that in the next couple months. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I mean, I had a question. So Zach, you were saying that your formula here, it's sort of untested, but did you have a chance to, I mean, I think you were forecasting last summer, right?
Yes.
How does it compare to your formula from last summer, and how'd that formula do?
The reason I started off using this formula this summer was because this was the one I consistently used last summer, and I did have some pretty strong performance last summer, but as we've seen, season to season can change. So I'm certainly keeping my eye on it, and if I need to make some adjustments, I will, based on how this summer starts to play out. But it worked well for me last summer.
Okay, I may have missed that, but I think that's an important data point as an end user. I definitely want to, that information. I think that's pretty important, especially you're using. I would even add to that. I agree with most of what you said, but you're factoring in 10-year normal and trend, and I think you can take that one step further and say, listen, hey, I believe I'm putting words in your mouth, but I believe that that the reason this works well is in part because of how the climate shift and in particular in the summer, U.S. temperatures and CDDs are warming, closer in the 10-year normal, and even a trend indicator are better representation than just using some longer term. And so I think that is an argument that it will also work this year, right? Because unless you believe that climate shift or whatever has changed, then this could be the best formula again, or this should be a good formula again this year. So, just a thought.
I'll keep that in mind.
Okay. Let's see, Dave, are you on the line? Would you like to talk about your forecast?
Which Dave? Darkangelo?
Yeah, Darkangelo.
Yeah, I took a fairly simple approach this week. I went with the long-term average, and then we run some analogs based upon some of the teleconnections, and none of them in early June are really that riveting. But in years with the weak NAO reflection, I should have added that when the tropics are fairly active in the in either both the far eastern Pacific and in the central western Indian Ocean, when you combine those two, we kind of come up with something that's around 40 degree days. So we run some teleconnections off of some. We run some numbers off of some historical teleconnections. Those they haven't worked out great. But I think it's interesting this week. One observation I want to make with regards to everyone's forecast is we're going to really test the idea of wisdom of crowds this week. Everyone is really, sitting up there between, I don't know, call it, 39 and like 42 or 43. So we're all fairly dialed in, and we're well above models, particularly the CFS. And this is an interesting case of, working on a trading desk and justifying like why you are where you are. So we're fairly far away from the modeling, close to the long-term average or slightly above the long-term average. So I guess we're going to see if we're kind of dialed in on that or not. If we have a year that kind of starts fooling us and we're not consistent with the last 5-year summer trend, then we're all getting taken to the woodshed here in the next 3 or 4 weeks as that falls apart. But this is a good week for the idea of crowding of numbers and seeing how well all of us have kind of come into that same solution with multiple means and justifications.
By the way, I think it's a good point, and that brings up a research idea. At some point we could this could be a good small project for one of our student members too, to test that, right? Like we could look back at the forecast over the past whatever and look at the correlation, evaluate the correlation between forecast spread, forecast contest, forecast spread, and verification, and to see does that or is there a good correlation when we're all tightly packed? Does the forecast typically verify with is there higher confidence or not? I don't think it's a slam dunk that it's the intuitive answer. So I think that'd be a really interesting thing to look into, and not too difficult. We just need to get the data into like a Excel file or something like that.
Yeah, Dave, one more thing. That's a good idea. I agree. I don't think it's as intuitive as we might think it is. For one, our sample size isn't overly large. Mm-hmm. And the second, we're only trying to verify like one discrete forecast here. I presumably we'd need, a season or several seasons worth of forecasts. But an interesting test is that, we've kind of all come up with the same rough numbers through different means. The question will be when we're wrong, how wrong could we be? And sometimes that's a way we sometimes approach a forecast, in private industry, which is great. You made a forecast. And the first question that will come out is, well, when you're wrong, which direction will you be wrong in, and how bad will it be? And that's a really hard question to answer, but it's a really great question. And from a user standpoint, if you're a trader or some end user of a forecast product, that's really insightful, because they're aware of the historical track record of forecasts, and to be frank, in the subseasonal space, they're not very good. So they know that there's going to be a, likely you're going to miss, right? The odds say that you are.
Right, right. That's a great point. And the way I would capture what Dave described too is, so we could look at it in terms of a linear, like correlation. Correlation's linear, right? So it would capture more of the linear relationship. But from for like Dave's, the Dave's sensitive to, and other folks too are sensitive to the extreme outliers and stuff. So we also want to be able to look at, does it at least reduce the risk that you're going to have one of those extreme outliers or not, right? It's both factors we need to look at, just the overall linear relationship, but also how does it impact the more extreme misses and stuff. Yeah, I like that. I like that. Okay. Well, I know we may have one or two other folks, but I think we need to leave it there just to be sensitive for everyone's time. Thank you for everyone who participated today, and thanks for, I know this was a little bit of a different discussion because we allowed for a little bit of research spin at the beginning and also a little bit of a how-to, but I think it was worthwhile to do that every once in a while. So I think, Zach, we'll see everyone next Tuesday. Is that right?
Yeah, as of right now, that's the time we will be having our discussion again.
All right. All right, great. All right, well, thanks everyone. We'll plan to see you next Tuesday, and we'll definitely send an email update before then, just in case something changes. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.